Ethan Pierce stood on the dusty platform of Tonopah Junction, Nevada, watching the train approach with a mixture of hope and resignation that only a desperate man could understand. The year was 1882, and at 29 years old, he had finally accepted that his sprawling ranch needed more than just cattle and horses to make it a home. He expected a quiet wife, someone plain and practical who would keep the house in order, maybe bear him a child or two, and ask little of him beyond providing shelter and food. The advertisement he had placed in the Eastern newspapers had been simple, almost cold in its precision. Hard-working rancher seeking modest woman for marriage, no frills, no fuss. The train screeched to a halt, steam billowing across the platform like morning fog over the desert. Ethan straightened his hat, running his calloused fingers over his clean-shaven jaw. He had at least made an effort to look presentable, though his sun-weathered face and the permanent squint from years under the Nevada sun told the story of a man who spent more time with livestock than people. Passengers began disembarking, and Ethan scanned each face with growing apprehension. An elderly couple, a businessman with a leather satchel, three rough-looking miners. Then he heard it, a sound so unexpected that it stopped him mid-breath. Laughter. Not the demure giggle he might have anticipated from a nervous bride, but full-bodied, genuine laughter that rang out like bells across the dusty platform. The woman who stepped off the train was nothing like what he had envisioned. Where he expected mousy brown, she had fiery auburn hair that caught the afternoon sun despite being pinned up under a modest traveling hat. Where he expected downcast eyes and hunched shoulders, she stood tall with her shoulders back, her green eyes sparkling with what could only be described as mischief. She was laughing at something the conductor had said, patting the older man's arm with such familiarity that Ethan felt a pang of something uncomfortable in his chest. She carried a carpet bag in one hand and a bird cage in the other, of all things. Inside the cage, a bright yellow canary hopped from perch to perch. As she scanned the platform, her gaze landed on him, and her smile grew impossibly wider. "You must be Ethan Pierce," she called out, crossing the platform with confident steps that kicked up little clouds of dust. "I'm Margaret Owens, though everyone calls me Maggie, and this," she lifted the bird cage, "is Sunshine. I hope you don't mind birds." Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. You brought a bird. Well, I couldn't very well leave her in Boston, could I?" Maggie's eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled. "She's been with me through thick and thin. Consider us a package deal." "I see." Ethan took her carpet bag, though she seemed reluctant to relinquish it. "The wagon's this way." As they walked through town toward where he had left his wagon hitched outside the general store, Maggie kept up a constant stream of conversation. She commented on the mountains in the distance, how different they looked from anything back east. She asked about the town, the ranch, the weather, his horse. She waved at strangers as if they were old friends. By the time they reached the wagon, Ethan's head was spinning. "You're not what I expected," he said before he could stop himself. Maggie paused, one foot on the wagon step. For the first time since she had arrived, her expression grew serious. "I could say the same about you. Your advertisement made you sound rather grim, but you have kind eyes." Then the smile was back, and she was up in the wagon seat, settling Sunshine's cage carefully between them. "Well, don't just stand there. I'm eager to see this ranch you wrote about." The ride out to the ranch took nearly an hour. Ethan spent most of it in stunned silence while Maggie filled every moment with observations, questions, and stories. She told him about growing up in Boston, the youngest of 5 daughters to a shipping merchant who had fallen on hard times. She explained that she had worked as a seamstress for 3 years, Saving every penny until the opportunity for a new life out west had seemed not just attractive but necessary. "My sisters all thought I was mad," she said, adjusting her hat against the afternoon sun. But staying in Boston, slowly becoming invisible as I aged, working my fingers to the bone for pennies that seemed matter to me. At least out here there's space to breathe, space to be yourself. "It's not easy living out here," Ethan felt compelled to warn. "The work is hard. The weather can be brutal. We're miles from town." "Good," Maggie said with such conviction that Ethan glanced at her in surprise. "I'm not afraid of hard work, and I rather like the idea of space between me and the nearest gossip." When the ranch came into view, Ethan found himself seeing it through fresh eyes. The house was solid, built of wood with a wide front porch he had added himself 2 summers ago. The barn stood sturdy and red against the scrubland, and the corrals held nearly 30 head of horses in various stages of training. It wasn't grand, but it was his, earned through years of sweat and determination after he had left his father's failing farm in Missouri at 18. Maggie was quiet for the first time since her arrival, and Ethan felt dread pool in his stomach. Of course it wasn't enough. Of course she would see it for what it was. A rough bachelor's property with none of the refinement a woman would want. Then she laughed again, that same bright sound that seemed to startle the chickens in their yard. "Oh, Ethan, it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. Look at all that space, and the porch. I've always wanted a porch where I could sit in the evenings, and are those roses?" "Someone planted roses by the fence, my mother," Ethan said quietly. "Before she died, I've kept them going." Maggie's hand found his arm, squeezing gently. "Then I'll tend them with extra care." The warmth of her touch seemed to burn through his shirt sleeve. Ethan cleared his throat and climbed down, reaching up to help her from the wagon. She placed her hands on his shoulders without hesitation, and as he lifted her down, he caught the scent of lavender and something sweet he couldn't identify. Her waist was solid beneath his hands, not fragile as he had feared, and when her feet touched the ground, she looked up at him with such open happiness that something in his chest cracked open just a little. "Let me show you the house," he said, his voice rougher than intended. Inside, the house was clean but Spartan. Ethan had done his best, scrubbing the floors and washing the windows until they gleamed. The kitchen held a solid stove and a table he had built himself. The sitting room had a fireplace and 2 chairs. Upstairs were 2 bedrooms, the larger of which he had prepared for Maggie. "Where will you sleep?" she asked, standing in the doorway of what was clearly the master bedroom. "The other room," Ethan said. "I thought. That is, until you're comfortable, we barely know each other." Maggie studied him for a long moment, and he shifted under her gaze. "You're a gentleman, Ethan Pierce. That's a rare thing, and I appreciate it." She set Sunshine's cage on the windowsill where the afternoon light streamed in, "though I expect we'll get to know each other quite well soon enough. Now, is there time before supper to see the rest of the property?" They spent the next 2 hours walking the ranch. Maggie met his 2 ranch hands, Tom and Billy, young men from town who worked for wages and room in the bunkhouse. She exclaimed over the horses, showing no fear as she let them lip treats from her palm. She examined the vegetable garden he had been neglecting and immediately began planning improvements. She even climbed up on the corral fence, balancing there like a girl half her age, watching the sun begin its descent toward the mountains. "I can't believe this is mine now," she said softly. "Well, ours. This morning I woke up in a boarding house room no bigger than a closet, and now look at all this." Ethan leaned against the fence beside her. "You're not what I expected," he repeated his earlier statement. "The advertisement I placed, it was for someone quiet, reserved, disappointed." Maggie asked, and for the first time he heard uncertainty in her voice. "No," Ethan said, surprising himself with the truth of it. "No, I don't think I am." That night, Maggie insisted on cooking supper despite Ethan's protests that she must be exhausted from her journey. She explored his kitchen with the determination of a general surveying a battlefield, then produced a meal of fried ham, potatoes, and biscuits that were somehow lighter than anything he had managed in his years of bachelor cooking. "My mother insisted all her daughters know their way around a kitchen," Maggie explained as they ate. "She said a woman should be able to feed herself, and those she loves with skill and pride. It was perhaps the only traditional thing she believed in." "She sounds like she was quite a woman," Ethan offered. "She died when I was 16, Maggie said, her smile dimming. "Pneumonia. After that, things got harder. Father tried, but he wasn't the same without her. None of us were." "My mother died 5 years ago," Ethan shared, finding the words easier than he had expected. "Fever. My father followed her within 6 months. Broken heart, the doctor said, though I think he just gave up." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the understanding of shared loss passing between them without need for more words. After supper, Maggie insisted on washing up, and Ethan found himself drying dishes beside her, something he had never imagined doing with another person. She hummed as she worked, some tune he didn't recognize, and the sound filled the house in a way that made it feel different, lived in, warm. When the work was done, they sat on the porch as the stars began to appear. Maggie had brought Sunshine's cage out, and the little bird chirped sleepily in the cooling air. "Tell me about yourself," Maggie said, settling into one of the porch chairs. "The real things, not what you put in the advertisement." Ethan leaned against the porch railing, considering. "I'm not much for talking," he started, then caught her amused expression. "But I suppose you figured that out. I came to Nevada 10 years ago with almost nothing. Worked as a ranch hand, saved every cent, learned everything I could about horses. 5 years ago, I had enough to buy this land and start my own operation. I breed and train horses, sell them to ranchers, the cavalry, anyone who needs a reliable mount." "You love it," Maggie observed. "The work, I mean, I can hear it in your voice." "I do," Ethan admitted. "Horses make sense to me. They're honest. Treat them right, they'll be loyal forever. Treat them wrong, well, you get what you deserve." "A fair philosophy," Maggie said. "I think people could learn a lot from that approach." "What about you?" Ethan asked, finding he genuinely wanted to know. "What do you love?" Maggie was quiet for a moment, her gaze on the darkening horizon. "I love creating things. When I was sewing, what I loved wasn't the monotony of it, but those moments when I could add something beautiful. A bit of embroidery, a clever seam, something that made the garment special. I love growing things, watching something go from seed to flower or fruit. I love laughter. Life's hard enough without forgetting to find joy in it." "I haven't laughed much in years," Ethan said quietly. Maggie looked at him, her expression soft in the twilight. "Then I'll just have to remind you how." The next morning, Ethan woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. He dressed quickly and came downstairs to find Maggie already in the kitchen, her hair in a long braid down her back, wearing a simple work dress with an apron tied around her waist. She had Sunshine's cage on the kitchen counter, and she was singing to the bird while she cooked. "Good morning," she called cheerfully when she saw him. "I hope you don't mind. I'm an early riser and I couldn't sleep past dawn with all this lovely light streaming in." "I'm usually up before dawn," Ethan said, feeling oddly guilty that he had slept later than usual. "Well, you must have needed the rest. Sit, sit. Breakfast is almost ready. Then you can show me what needs doing around here and I'll figure out where I can be useful." They fell into an easy routine over the following days, though easy was perhaps too simple a word for what was happening. Ethan showed Maggie the rhythm of ranch life. The early mornings, the constant care the animals required, the maintenance that never seemed to end. She absorbed everything with an enthusiasm that both charmed and bewildered him. But Maggie didn't just learn. She transformed. Within a week, the house had curtains she had sewn from fabric she insisted he take her to town to buy. The vegetable garden had been weeded, expanded, and replanted. She had befriended his ranch hands, learning their favorite foods and making sure they were well fed. She sang while she worked, hummed while she cooked, and told stories at supper that had even taciturn Tom cracking smiles. The sound of her laughter became a constant presence. She laughed when one of the chickens escaped and led her on a chase around the yard. She laughed when she accidentally dumped a bucket of water on herself while washing the windows. She laughed when Ethan's horse nuzzled her looking for treats, nearly knocking her over. "Don't you ever get frustrated?" Ethan asked one afternoon after she had spent 2 hours fighting with the old hand pump that supplied water to the kitchen, only to have it break again within minutes of her repair. "Of course I do," Maggie said, wiping her wet hands on her apron. "But what good does staying angry do? The pump is still broken whether I'm cursing or laughing, so I might as well laugh." "You're unlike anyone I've ever met," Ethan said, shaking his head. "I'll take that as a compliment," Maggie replied with a grin. "Now, are you going to fix this pump, or shall I fetch Tom to show me how?" They had been married by the circuit preacher in town at the end of her first week, a simple ceremony with Tom and Billy as witnesses. It had been practical, necessary even, but standing in the small church with Maggie beside him, Ethan had felt the weight of the commitment in a way he hadn't anticipated. When the preacher had said he could kiss his bride, Ethan had leaned down awkwardly, intending a brief brush of lips, but Maggie had risen on her toes and kissed him with such warmth that his ears had burned red. Still, they maintained separate bedrooms. Ethan told himself it was proper, that Maggie needed time to adjust. But the truth was that he was afraid of the feelings she was stirring in him, afraid of wanting more than the practical arrangement he had planned for. Afraid that if he let himself care too much, the inevitable disappointments of life would hurt more than he could bear. Maggie seemed content with the arrangement, though sometimes he caught her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. She never pushed, never demanded. She simply continued to be herself, bright and warm, and slowly becoming essential to the functioning of not just the house but his entire world. One evening, about 3 weeks after her arrival, Ethan came in from working with a particularly difficult horse to find Maggie sitting on the front porch steps, her face in her hands. She wasn't crying, but her shoulders were slumped in a way he had never seen. "Maggie," he said, alarm shooting through him. "What's wrong?" She looked up and her eyes were dry but tired. "Nothing's wrong, I'm just being foolish. Tell me anyway." Ethan sat beside her on the step, their shoulders nearly touching. Maggie sighed. "I got a letter from my sister today. She writes that she's engaged to a banker's son. There's going to be a big wedding with all of Boston society invited. She described the dress she's having made, the flowers they've ordered, the celebration that will last for days." She paused, picking at a thread on her apron. "And then she asked how I was finding life with my rancher, as if this were all some grand adventure I'd tire of soon enough." "Do you regret coming?" Ethan asked, his voice carefully neutral even as his heart clenched. "No," Maggie said immediately, turning to look at him. "Not for a single moment. That's not why I'm sad. I'm sad because I realized today that I've been working so hard to make myself useful, to prove my worth here, that I haven't let myself simply feel. And the truth is, Ethan, I'm lonely." The admission hung in the air between them. Ethan felt his throat tighten. You're lonely, but you're surrounded by people. You talk more in a day than I do in a week. Talking isn't the same as connecting, Maggie said softly. Tom and Billy are sweet boys, but they're practically children. The few women I've met in town are polite but distant, and you. She trailed off, and me, Ethan prompted, his heart beating faster. You're kind. You're respectful. You're everything a good man should be. But sometimes I feel like you're still waiting for the quiet, meek woman you wanted, and I'm just this noisy interruption to the life you planned. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He had been so focused on his own fears that he hadn't considered how his distance might be affecting her. Maggie, he started, then stopped, forcing himself to find the right words. When I placed that advertisement, I thought I knew what I needed. Someone who wouldn't disturb my peace. Someone who would fit into my life without changing it, but I was wrong. I didn't need peace. I needed life. You've brought life to this place in a way I didn't know was possible. Maggie's eyes were wide, hopeful. Then why do you keep yourself so separate? We're married, but we live like polite strangers sharing a house. Ethan looked down at his work-worn hands. I'm afraid, he admitted, the words costing him. Everyone I've ever loved has left. My mother, my father, even the dog I had as a boy. Nothing good has ever stayed. And you're so full of life and joy, and I'm afraid that if I let myself care, if I let myself love you, you'll realize what a mistake this was. You'll see that I'm just a rough rancher who doesn't know how to match your light, and you'll leave too. Silence settled between them for a long moment. Then Maggie did something unexpected. She started to laugh. Not the bright, ringing laugh he had come to know, but a softer, more tender sound. Oh, Ethan, she said, taking his hand in both of hers. I crossed half a country to marry a man I'd never met based on a rather grim advertisement. I left everything familiar behind because I believed there was something better waiting for me. Do you really think I'm the kind of person who gives up easily? I suppose not, Ethan admitted, allowing a small smile. I knew what I was getting into, Maggie continued. Or at least I thought I did. I expected hard work and a quiet life. What I didn't expect was to find a man who tends his mother's roses, who treats his animals with such care, who fixes my mistakes with the pump without complaint, and who looks at me sometimes when he thinks I'm not watching with such longing that it makes my heart ache. Ethan's head snapped up. You notice that? I notice everything about you, Maggie said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. The way you take your coffee, the way you calm a spooked horse, the way you smile just a little when sunshine sings in the morning. I notice because I'm falling in love with you, Ethan Pierce, and it terrifies me that you won't let yourself fall with me. The confession hung between them, brave and vulnerable. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, like a door long locked finally swinging open. I don't know how, he said hoarsely. I don't know how to be what you need. Just be yourself, Maggie said, squeezing his hand. And maybe let me in. Let me be your partner, not just your housekeeper. Let me share your worries as well as your home. Let me love you, Ethan. He looked at her then, really looked at her. At the way the evening light caught the copper in her hair, at the hope and fear mixed in her green eyes, at the strength in the set of her shoulders despite her admitted loneliness. And he thought about how empty his life had been before she had stepped off that train, and how full it had become in just a few short weeks. I'm already falling, he said finally. I think I have been since I first heard you laugh on that platform. It just scared me too much to admit it. Maggie's smile was like sunrise. Then stop being scared, or at least be scared with me instead of alone. Ethan lifted his hand to her face, cupping her cheek with a gentleness that surprised them both. I'll try, he promised. Then he leaned in and kissed her, not the awkward press of lips from their wedding day, but a real kiss, full of all the feelings he had been holding back. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing a little harder, Maggie laughed that bright laugh he loved. Well, that's a start. That night, Ethan lay in his separate bed and stared at the ceiling, thinking about what Maggie had said, about being partners, about letting her in. It went against every protective instinct he had developed over years of loss, but he couldn't deny that she was right. The distance between them wasn't protecting either of them. It was just making them both lonely. The next morning, he came down to breakfast determined to change things. "I thought maybe you'd like to come with me today," he said as Maggie set a plate of eggs in front of him. "I need to check on the horses in the far pasture, and there's a meadow up there that should be full of wildflowers this time of year. I thought, maybe you'd enjoy seeing it." Maggie's face lit up. "I'd love that. Let me pack us some lunch." They rode out together after breakfast, Maggie on a gentle mare named Daisy that Ethan had been training. She was a natural rider, he discovered, sitting the horse with easy confidence. They talked as they rode, but it was different now. Ethan found himself sharing things he usually kept buried. Stories about his childhood in Missouri, his dreams for the ranch, his worries about the coming winter and whether he had enough hay put by. Maggie listened, asked questions, offered suggestions. She didn't just hear him. She engaged with him, and Ethan felt the walls he had built around himself beginning to crumble. The meadow was everything he had promised and more. Wildflowers carpeted the ground in waves of yellow, purple, and white. They dismounted and walked through the blooms while the horses grazed nearby. Maggie picked flowers as she went, weaving them into a crown with practiced fingers. "My sisters and I used to do this when we were girls," she explained, tongue between her teeth as she concentrated. "We'd pretend we were princesses in a fairy tale." She finished the crown and placed it on Ethan's head, stepping back to admire her work. "There, now you're Prince Charming." "I look ridiculous," Ethan protested, but he was smiling. "You look happy," Maggie countered. "That's what you look." They ate lunch sitting in the flowers, talking and laughing. Maggie told him about Boston, about the noise and the crowds and the way you could be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone. Ethan found himself telling her about his first year in Nevada, about how hard it had been, how many times he had almost given up. "I'm glad you didn't," Maggie said, lying back in the flowers and looking up at the sky. "Give up, I mean. If you had, you wouldn't be here and I wouldn't have anywhere to go." "You would have found somewhere," Ethan said, lying down beside her. "Someone as determined as you always finds a way." "Maybe," Maggie said, "but I wouldn't have found you." Ethan reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. They lay like that for a long time, watching clouds drift by, and Ethan thought that maybe, just maybe, he could learn to accept happiness without waiting for the other shoe to drop. As summer progressed into fall, the partnership between them deepened. Maggie started helping more directly with the ranch work, learning to tend the horses, mend fences, and manage the books. She had a quick mind for numbers, and soon she had organized his chaotic record, keeping into a system that actually made sense. But more than that, she brought joy to everything she touched. She declared that the ranch needed a name, and christened it the Laughing Horse Ranch after watching Ethan's stallion, Thunder, roll in the dirt with what looked like absolute delight. She started a tradition of Sunday picnics, insisting that even hard-working ranchers needed a day of rest. She taught Tom and Billy card games in the evenings, and the sound of laughter from the bunkhouse became a regular occurrence. And slowly, carefully, Ethan opened himself to her. He started seeking her out during the day, finding excuses to work near where she was working. He began sharing not just his thoughts but his feelings. When a horse he had been training for months was sold to a cavalry officer, and Ethan felt the pang of loss despite knowing it was the business. Maggie held him and let him grieve. "You put part of yourself into every animal you train," she said softly. "It's natural to miss them." "I shouldn't get so attached," Ethan said against her hair. "Why not? The love you give them makes them better, stronger. That's a gift, Ethan. Don't diminish it." It was in these small moments that Ethan found himself falling deeper in love with her. The way she understood him without judgment. The way she saw strength where he saw weakness. The way she made him want to be braver, more open, more alive. One night in late September, after they had finished a particularly exhausting day of moving the horses to their winter pasture, they sat on the porch in the cooling air. Maggie was mending one of Ethan's shirts, and he was working oil into a bridle that needed repair. It was domestic and comfortable, and Ethan realized with a start that this was what happiness felt like. Not grand declarations or dramatic gestures, but simply being with someone who made everything better. "Maggie," he said, setting down the bridle, "would you? That is, I was thinking." He stopped, frustrated with himself. "Yes," Maggie prompted, not looking up from her sewing. "Would you want to share a room?" Ethan blurted out. "With me, I mean, as a proper husband and wife." Maggie's hands stilled. She set down the mending and looked at him with those clear green eyes. "Are you asking because you think you should, or because you want to?" "Because I want to," Ethan said firmly. "Because I'm tired of sleeping alone when the woman I love is just down the hall. Because I want to wake up next to you and fall asleep holding you. Because I'm tired of being afraid of happiness." Maggie stood up and crossed to where he sat. She took his hands and pulled him to his feet. "Then yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." That night they moved Ethan's things into the master bedroom. It was awkward at first. Neither of them quite knew what to do or say. But as they lay together in the darkness, Maggie curled against Ethan's side and his arm around her shoulders, it felt right in a way nothing else ever had. "This is where you belong," Maggie whispered. "With me." "Yes," Ethan agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "This is exactly where I belong." Their relationship transformed after that night. The physical closeness opened doors that had remained shut, and Ethan found himself able to express feelings he had kept locked away for years. He told Maggie he loved her, often and with increasing ease. He laughed at her jokes and sometimes even made his own. He let himself be vulnerable and found that Maggie's love didn't waver when she saw his weaknesses. October brought the first cold snaps, and with them, preparations for winter. Maggie threw herself into preserving food, filling the pantry with jars of vegetables from her garden, preserved fruits, and salted meat. She knitted socks and mittens, mended every piece of clothing they owned, and generally prepared for the harsh Nevada winter like a general preparing for battle. "I'm not taking any chances," she declared when Ethan teased her about her thoroughness. "My first winter here is not going to be spent freezing or hungry if I have anything to say about it." Tom and Billy had returned to town for the winter, leaving Ethan and Maggie alone on the ranch except for the animals. Ethan had worried that the isolation might bother Maggie, but she seemed to thrive on it. They developed a rhythm to their days, working together in a partnership that felt natural and right. The first real snowstorm hit in late November, dumping 2 feet of snow overnight and trapping them in the house for 3 days. Ethan worried that Maggie would grow restless, but instead she seemed to view it as an adventure. She made elaborate meals, taught him to play chess, and told him stories from her childhood. They made love in front of the fire, slow and sweet, and Ethan thought that he had never been so content. On the 3rd day, when the storm finally broke and they could venture outside, they worked together to dig out the barn and care for the animals. Everything was covered in pristine white, the world transformed into something new and beautiful. It's like we're the only two people in the world, Maggie said, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Ethan asked, shoveling snow away from the barn door. With you, it's a very good thing. Maggie threw a snowball at him, hitting him square in the chest. Though I reserve the right to complain when I'm desperate for female conversation in a few months. Ethan scooped up his own handful of snow, advancing on her with mock menace. Oh, you want to start a war, Mrs. Pierce? Maggie shrieked with laughter and ran, and for the next 20 minutes, they chased each other around the yard like children, throwing snowballs and laughing until their sides hurt. When Ethan finally caught her, they tumbled into a snowdrift together, and he kissed her cold lips until they were both breathless. I love you, he said, the words coming as easily as breathing now. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. Good, Maggie said, her eyes sparkling. Because you're stuck with me now, Ethan Pierce. For better or worse, remember, for better, Ethan said firmly. Definitely for better. Winter settled in with determination, but inside their home warmth reigned. They read books aloud to each other in the evenings. Maggie's animated voices for different characters always making Ethan smile. They cooked together, Maggie teaching Ethan techniques she had learned from her mother while Ethan shared the simple, hearty recipes that had sustained him through his bachelor years. Christmas came, and though they were alone, Maggie insisted on celebrating. She made a feast with a chicken from their coop, vegetables from her preserved stores, and a dried apple pie that was the best thing Ethan had ever tasted. She had even made him a gift. A new shirt sewn from fabric she must have been hiding, embroidered at the collar with a pattern of horses. I worked on it while you were out with the animals, she explained, watching anxiously as he examined it. Do you like it? It's perfect, Ethan said, genuinely moved. I'm sorry I didn't get you anything. Yes, you did, Maggie said softly. You gave me this life, this home. You. That's more than enough. Ethan had never been good with words, but he pulled her close and tried to show her with kisses and touches what he couldn't quite express. Later, as they sat by the fire, Maggie in her nightgown and Ethan in his new shirt, he said, Next year I'll do better. Next year I'll get you something special. Next year, Maggie repeated, a smile playing at her lips. I like the sound of that. Next year and the year after and all the years after that. All of them, Ethan agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. The new year of 1883 brought bitter cold but also a deepening of the bond between them. In the enforced closeness of winter, they learned each other's rhythms, habits, and dreams. Maggie talked about wanting children someday, a house full of noise and laughter. Ethan admitted that the idea terrified him, but that with her, he thought maybe he could do it. You'll be a wonderful father, Maggie insisted. Look at how gentle you are with the horses, with everything you care for. Horses are easier than children, Ethan protested. Are they, though? Maggie laughed. I've never seen a horse throw a tantrum like my youngest sister used to. You'll be fine. We'll figure it out together. Together. It was a word that had come to mean everything to Ethan. Together they weathered the winter. Together they planned for the spring. Together they built a life that was richer and fuller than anything he had imagined. In February, Maggie started feeling ill in the mornings. At first, she dismissed it as something she ate, but when it persisted for over a week, a different possibility occurred to them both. You think? Maggie asked, her hand on her stomach, her expression caught between hope and fear. Could be, Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady even as his heart raced. Should I ride to town for the doctor? In this weather? Don't be foolish, we'll wait. If I'm right, we'll know soon enough. The waiting was agony and joy all mixed together. Ethan found himself watching Maggie constantly, noting every change, every new symptom. When she started to show the faintest curve to her belly, they were both certain. "We're having a baby," Maggie said, wonder in her voice. "We're going to be parents." Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her as gently as if she were made of glass. "Are you happy?" he asked, needing to hear it. "I'm terrified," Maggie admitted. "But yes, I'm happy. So happy I could burst with it. Are you?" "Yes," Ethan said, and realized it was true. The fear was there, the worry about all the things that could go wrong, but beneath it was a joy he had never experienced. "Yes, I'm happy." As winter finally began to release its grip and signs of spring appeared, they made plans. Ethan built a cradle with his own hands, carving designs into the wood with painstaking care. Maggie sewed tiny clothes, her fingers flying over the fabric as she sang to the baby growing inside her. They argued good-naturedly about names, about whether to paint the spare room, about how they would manage the work of the ranch with a newborn. "We'll figure it out," Maggie said, her response to every worry. "We always do." Tom and Billy returned in early April, and their excitement about the coming baby was almost comical. Both young men were barely into their 20s, and the idea of a baby on the ranch seemed to fill them with equal parts delight and terror. "I've never even held a baby," Billy confessed one evening at supper. "What if I break it?" "Babies are tougher than they look," Maggie assured him, "and I'll need all the help I can get, so you'd better get comfortable with the idea." Spring brought an explosion of work, as it always did. The horses needed training, fences needed mending, and the garden needed planting. Ethan tried to get Maggie to rest, but she was having none of it. "I'm pregnant, not an invalid," she said, continuing to weed the garden despite his protests. "Women have been having babies and working for thousands of years. I'll be fine." Still, Ethan worried. He couldn't help it. The thought of anything happening to Maggie or the baby kept him up at night. He had finally allowed himself to be happy, to build something precious, and the fear of losing it was almost overwhelming. Maggie, with her uncanny ability to read him, pulled him aside one evening after supper. "Talk to me," she said. "You're worrying yourself sick." "What if something goes wrong?" Ethan asked, the words tumbling out. "What if I lose you? I can't. Maggie, I can't survive losing you." "You won't lose me," Maggie said firmly. "I'm strong, the baby's healthy, and women do this every day, but I need you to trust me, Ethan. Trust that I know my own body, trust that I'll ask for help if I need it." "I'm trying," Ethan said. "I'm just so afraid." "Then be afraid," Maggie said, taking his face in her hands. "But don't let the fear steal the joy. We're having a baby, Ethan, our baby. That's a miracle, and I won't let fear poison it." Her words steadied him, as they always did. He took a breath and nodded. "You're right. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry, just be present. Be here with me in this moment and let the future take care of itself." As summer approached and Maggie's belly swelled, Ethan found himself falling in love with her all over again. She was radiant, glowing with the life growing inside her. She sang to the baby constantly, and sometimes Ethan would catch her in quiet conversation with her stomach, telling their child about the world waiting outside. "I'm telling the baby about you," she explained when he asked. "About how strong you are, how gentle. About how lucky we both are to have you." Ethan thought his heart might burst. "I'm the lucky one," he insisted. "You turned my life into something I never dreamed it could be." "Then we're all lucky," Maggie said, taking his hand and placing it on her belly. "Feel that, the baby's kicking." Ethan felt the flutter beneath his palm and marveled. This was his child, his and Maggie's, a life they had created together. In that moment, the fear receded, replaced by a fierce protectiveness and love that took his breath away. The baby came on a sweltering day in late July. Maggie's labor started in the early morning, and Ethan sent Billy racing to town for the midwife while he stayed with Maggie, holding her hand and trying not to let his terror show. "I'm all right," Maggie assured him between contractions, her face pale but determined. "This is normal. Everything is fine." But as the hours wore on and the pain intensified, Ethan felt his carefully maintained calm beginning to crack. Where was the midwife? Why was this taking so long? Maggie was trying to stay strong, but he could see the exhaustion in her eyes. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the midwife arrived. She was a sturdy woman named Mrs. Patterson who took one look at the situation and took charge with brisk efficiency. "Out," she told Ethan. "I'll call you when it's time." "I'm not leaving her," Ethan said stubbornly. "Yes, you are," Maggie panted. "Go on, darling, I'll be fine. Mrs. Patterson knows what she's doing." Reluctantly, Ethan let himself be ushered out. He paced the porch for hours, unable to sit, unable to rest. Tom and Billy joined him, equally anxious, though they had no real stake beyond friendship and affection. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and still there was no word. Then, just as the last light was fading, Ethan heard it. A cry, thin and reedy, but unmistakably a baby's cry. His knees nearly gave out and he had to grab the porch railing for support. Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway, her sleeves rolled up and a tired smile on her face. "You have a son, Mr. Pierce, a healthy boy with a good set of lungs. And your wife is doing just fine." Ethan didn't remember moving, but suddenly he was in the bedroom. Maggie was propped up on pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her face exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made. "Come meet your son," Maggie said softly. Ethan approached slowly, almost reverently. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby. His son. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was making little mewling sounds, his tiny fists waving. "He's perfect," Ethan whispered, his voice breaking. "You're both perfect." "Hold him," Maggie urged, carefully transferring the baby to Ethan's arms. Ethan had handled newborn foals, had gentled wild horses, but nothing had prepared him for the feeling of holding his own child. The baby was so small, so fragile, and yet Ethan could feel the life force in him, strong and determined. "Hello, little one," Ethan said, his eyes burning with tears he didn't bother to hide. "I'm your father, and I promise I'm going to do everything I can to keep you safe and happy." The baby opened his eyes, unfocused but searching, and Ethan felt his heart crack wide open. All his fears, all his worries, they didn't disappear, but they were overshadowed by a love so profound it changed everything. "What should we name him?" Maggie asked, watching them with soft eyes. They had discussed names, but nothing had felt quite right. Now, looking at his son, Ethan thought of his own father despite everything. "James," he said. "James Samuel Pierce, after both our fathers." "James," Maggie repeated, testing the name. "Jamie. Yes, I like that." "Welcome to the world, Jamie." The first weeks with a newborn were exhausting in ways Ethan had never imagined. Jamie was healthy but demanding, needing to be fed every few hours, day and night. Maggie handled it with the same determination she brought to everything, but Ethan could see the exhaustion taking its toll. He did everything he could to help. He changed diapers, walked the floor with Jamie when he was fussy, and took over all the household chores so Maggie could rest when the baby slept. Tom and Billy pitched in too, competing to see who could make Maggie the best meals and taking on extra work around the ranch without complaint. "You've got a good family here," Mrs. Patterson observed when she came to check on them a week after the birth. "That baby's lucky." "We're the lucky ones," Ethan corrected, watching Maggie nurse Jamie in the rocking chair he had made for her. The late afternoon sun streamed through the window, turning her hair to copper fire, and Ethan thought he had never seen anything so beautiful. As summer turned to fall, they settled into new rhythms. Jamie grew stronger and more alert, his eyes focusing and following movement. He started to smile, and the first time he smiled directly at Ethan, Maggie laughed at the expression of pure wonder on her husband's face. "He knows you," she said. "He knows his papa." Ethan found himself doing things he never would have imagined. He sang lullabies in his rough voice. He made silly faces to coax smiles. He carried Jamie in a sling Maggie had made so the baby could be close while Ethan worked. He was clumsy at first, always afraid he would do something wrong, but gradually he gained confidence. "You're a natural," Maggie told him one evening as they sat together, Jamie asleep on Ethan's chest. "I knew you would be." "I'm terrified every minute of every day," Ethan admitted, "but I love him so much it hurts." "That's what being a parent is," Maggie said wisely. Terror and love all mixed together. The ranch thrived. Word of Ethan's skill with horses had spread, and he had more business than he could handle. He hired another hand, a quiet man named Joseph, to help with the increased workload. Maggie's garden produced bountifully, and she traded her preserves and vegetables in town for supplies and a little extra money. But more than the material success, the ranch had become a home in the truest sense. It was filled with laughter and love, with the sound of a baby's cries and coos, with the comfortable conversation of partners who had built something real together. One evening in late October, after they had put Jamie to bed, Ethan and Maggie sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket against the autumn chill. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the desert air was sharp and clean. "Do you remember a year ago," Maggie asked, "when I told you I was lonely?" "I remember," Ethan said. "It was the night everything changed." "I've been thinking about that conversation," Maggie continued, "about how close we came to never having this. If I hadn't spoken up, if you had kept yourself closed off, we might have lived our whole lives as strangers sharing a house." "But we didn't," Ethan said, pulling her closer. "You were brave enough to push, and I was lucky enough to listen." "We were both brave," Maggie corrected. "It's scary, opening yourself up to someone, letting them see all of you, the good and the bad, but it's worth it. This is worth it." "Everything," Ethan agreed. "You're worth everything." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the desert. An owl hooted in the distance. The horses moved quietly in the barn. Inside, Jamie made a small sound in his sleep, and both of them tensed, waiting to see if he would wake. When silence returned, they both relaxed. "I want more," Maggie said suddenly. "More children, I mean. Not right away, but someday. I want Jamie to have siblings, to know what it's like to have that bond." "More chaos," Ethan teased, but his heart was full at the thought. "More sleepless nights and constant worry." "More love," Maggie said simply. "More laughter, more life." "Then more it is," Ethan said, kissing her temple. "Whatever you want, Maggie. You gave me everything. The least I can do is give you the family you dreamed of." Winter came again, but this time they faced it as a family. The house that had once been cold and empty was now filled with warmth and sound. Jamie grew and changed, his personality emerging. He was a happy baby, quick to smile and laugh, and both Ethan and Maggie saw themselves reflected in him. Ethan's business continued to grow. He was becoming known throughout Nevada as one of the best horse trainers around, and people traveled from distant ranches to buy his horses or to have him train theirs. The money allowed them to make improvements to the ranch. A new roof, a larger barn, better fencing. But more importantly, the success gave them security. Ethan no longer worried constantly about making it through the winter or whether they would have enough. They weren't rich by any means, but they were comfortable, and that was more than Ethan had ever hoped for. Maggie thrived in her role as mother and partner. She managed the household with easy efficiency, tended her ever-expanding garden, kept the books for the ranch, and still found time to sew, to read, to engage with the community in town. She had become friends with several of the ranch wives, and occasionally they would visit, bringing their children to play with Jamie and their conversation to share with Maggie. "I'm not lonely anymore," she told Ethan one evening. "I have everything I ever wanted, even though it's not Boston." Ethan asked, "Even though you gave up the life you knew, especially because it's not Boston," Maggie said firmly. "That life was killing me slowly. This life, our life, it's everything. You're everything." True to her word, Maggie was pregnant again before Jamie's second birthday. This time, Ethan was less terrified, though he still worried. But he had seen Maggie's strength during her first pregnancy and labor, and he trusted her when she said she was fine. Their second child, a daughter they named Lucy Margaret Pierce, arrived on a spring morning in 1885. Her birth was easier than Jamie's had been, and Ethan was allowed in the room this time, holding Maggie's hand through it all. When Lucy was placed in his arms, tiny and red-faced and screaming with impressive volume, Ethan felt that same overwhelming love he had felt with Jamie. "She's got your temper," he said to Maggie, who laughed weakly. "And your stubbornness, I suspect," Maggie replied. "We're in trouble." Jamie was fascinated by his new sister, wanting to touch her constantly. Ethan and Maggie had to watch him carefully at first, worried he might be too rough, but Jamie was surprisingly gentle with the baby. "My sister," he would say proudly to anyone who would listen. "My Lucy." The ranch continued to prosper, and with it, the Pierce family. Ethan hired more help, eventually building a second bunkhouse to accommodate the growing number of hands. The Laughing Horse Ranch became known not just for its excellent horses, but for the fair treatment of its workers and the warm welcome given to anyone who stopped by. Maggie's laughter still rang out across the property, now joined by the laughter of their children. Jamie was a serious little boy, thoughtful and careful, but Lucy was her mother's daughter, bright and bold and filled with joy. The two children were different as night and day, but they adored each other. Years passed in a blur of work and love, challenges and triumphs. There were hard times. A particularly brutal winter that killed several horses, a summer drought that withered the garden, illnesses that left them all exhausted and worried. But they faced everything together, and somehow that made even the hardest times bearable. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan took Maggie back to the meadow where they had gone on that early ride together. The children were with Mrs. Patterson in town for the day, giving them rare time alone. "I can't believe it's been 10 years, Maggie said, lying in the wildflowers just as she had that first time. "It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once." "Best 10 years of my life," Ethan said, lying beside her and taking her hand. "You know, I almost didn't place that advertisement. I thought about just staying alone, making do." "I'm glad you didn't," Maggie said. "Though I'm curious, what would you have said if you'd known what you were really getting? Not the quiet, meek wife you wanted, but me with all my noise and laughter." Ethan thought about it seriously. "Honestly, I probably would have been terrified. I would have talked myself out of it, convinced myself I needed someone different." He turned to look at her, this woman who had transformed his life. "But I would have been wrong. You were exactly what I needed, even if I didn't know it. You taught me how to live, not just survive. You taught me that love is worth the risk of loss. You gave me a family and a home and more happiness than I thought possible." Maggie's eyes were bright with tears. "You gave me freedom," she said. "Freedom to be myself, loud and messy and imperfect. Freedom to love completely. Freedom to build the life I wanted instead of the one expected of me. We saved each other, Ethan." "We did," Ethan agreed. He sat up and pulled something from his pocket. It was a small wooden horse, carved with intricate detail. "I made this for you. It's not much, but I wanted you to have something to mark the occasion." Maggie took the carving, turning it over in her hands with wonder. "It's beautiful. You made this." "Been working on it for months," Ethan admitted. "It's a copy of Daisy, the horse you learned to ride on, I thought." "I don't know. I wanted you to have something that represented when things really started to change for us." "I love it," Maggie said, clutching it to her chest. "I'll treasure it always." She leaned over and kissed him thoroughly. "Thank you for this, for everything." They made love there in the meadow, slow and sweet and familiar after 10 years together. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, Ethan thought about how different his life was from what he had planned. He had expected a quiet wife, a simple arrangement, a peaceful existence. Instead, he had gotten Maggie with her laughter and her fire, her strength and her joy. She had filled his life with noise and love and chaos and meaning. She had given him children who carried pieces of both of them. She had made the Laughing Horse Ranch into something more than just a business. She had made it a home. "What are you thinking about?" Maggie asked, tracing patterns on his chest. "About how wrong I was," Ethan said. "About what I thought I wanted, about what I actually needed." "We're all wrong sometimes," Maggie said. "The trick is being willing to admit it and change course." "You made me willing," Ethan said. "You made me brave enough to try." "We made each other brave," Maggie corrected, as she always did. "That's what love does." They rode back to the ranch as the sun was setting, arriving just as Mrs. Patterson returned with the children. Jamie and Lucy ran to greet them, chattering about their day in town, and Ethan scooped them both up, one in each arm. "Did you have a good anniversary?" Jamie asked with the seriousness of his 8 years. "The best," Ethan assured him, "though not as good as coming home to you two." Lucy, at 6, was less interested in sentiment. "Mrs. Patterson bought us peppermint sticks," she announced. "And I saw a dog in town that looked just like the one in my picture book." "Did you now?" Maggie said, ruffling her daughter's hair. "Well, you'll have to tell me all about it while we get you ready for bed." That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Ethan and Maggie sat on their porch as they had so many nights before. The stars were bright overhead and the desert air was cool and clean. "Another 10 years?" Maggie asked, taking his hand. "Another 50 if I'm lucky," Ethan replied. "A lifetime with you still won't be enough." "Then we'll make every moment count," Maggie said. "Fill them all with love and laughter." "And you'll keep teaching me," Ethan said. "Keep reminding me not to take it all too seriously." "Always," Maggie promised. "Though you're much better at it now than you used to be, I actually heard you humming yesterday while you worked." "Did you?" Ethan was surprised. He hadn't even realized. "You did. And it made me happy because it meant you were happy. That's all I ever wanted, you know, for you to be as happy as you make me." "I am," Ethan said, pulling her close. "Happier than I ever thought possible. You did that, Maggie. You and your laughter and your stubborn refusal to let me hide from life." "We did that," Maggie said, resting her head on his shoulder. "Together. Together." It was still Ethan's favorite word. The years continued to unfold, bringing with them all the joys and sorrows that make up a life. Jamie grew into a young man who shared his father's gift with horses and his mother's emotional intelligence. Lucy became a force of nature, bright and bold and determined to make her mark on the world. There were more children, 2 more sons who filled the house with even more noise and love. The ranch prospered beyond anything Ethan had dreamed. The Laughing Horse Ranch became one of the most respected horse operations in Nevada, known for the quality of its animals and the integrity of its owners. But more than business success, It was known as a place of warmth and welcome, where laughter was as common as hard work. Ethan and Maggie grew older together, their hair graying, their faces weathering, but their love only deepening with time. They had their arguments, their difficult moments, but they had learned early on how to weather storms together, and that lesson served them well. On their 25th anniversary, their children threw them a celebration at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around. There was music and dancing, food and laughter. At one point, Ethan found himself standing at the edge of the crowd, watching Maggie dance with their youngest son, her face alight with joy. "You're a lucky man, Mr. Pierce," Joseph, his longest-serving ranch hand, said, coming to stand beside him. "The luckiest," Ethan agreed. "Though luck doesn't quite cover it, blessed maybe. Grateful, certainly." "She's a special woman," Joseph continued. "In all my years working here, I don't think I've ever seen her without a smile, and she brought that out in you too. When I first started here, you were all business, no pleasure. Now look at you." Ethan looked at himself as if through Joseph's eyes. He was smiling, he realized. It was his default expression now, had been for years. When had that happened? When had happiness become so natural that he didn't even notice it? The answer, of course, was gradually. Day by day, year by year, Maggie had worn away his defenses and his fears. She had taught him that life was meant to be lived fully, that love was worth any risk, that laughter was as necessary as breathing. As if sensing his gaze, Maggie looked up and caught his eye. She said something to their son and made her way through the crowd to him. "Why are you hiding over here?" she asked, taking his hand. "Come dance with me." "I'm not hiding," Ethan protested. "I'm observing." "You're hiding," Maggie said firmly. "Now come on. It's our anniversary and I want to dance with my husband." Ethan let himself be pulled onto the makeshift dance floor. He had never been a good dancer, but with Maggie in his arms, it didn't matter. They moved together with the easy familiarity of 25 years, and Ethan thought about the journey that had brought them here. "What are you thinking about?" Maggie asked, looking up at him. "About how grateful I am," Ethan said honestly. "About how different my life would have been if you hadn't gotten off that train." "Our lives," Maggie corrected gently. "Your life would have been different, so would mine. We'd both be less." "We would," Ethan agreed. "You know, I was thinking earlier about that first day, how shocked I was when you stepped off the train, how you were nothing like what I expected." "Disappointed," Maggie teased, though they both knew the answer. "The opposite," Ethan said. "It just took me a while to realize it. You were exactly what I needed, even though you were nothing like what I thought I wanted." "And now?" Maggie asked. 25 years later, now I can't imagine anything different," Ethan said. "You, me, our children, this life we've built, it's everything. You're everything." Maggie's eyes shone with tears and love. "You're everything to me too," she said. "You gave me a home, a family, a partner. You let me be myself, loud and messy and imperfect. You loved me not despite those things, but because of them." "I loved you the moment I heard you laugh on that platform," Ethan admitted. "I just didn't know it yet. I was too busy being terrified." "And now?" Maggie asked again. "Now I'm still terrified," Ethan said honestly. "Terrified of losing you, of anything happening to our children, of this happiness being taken away. But I've learned that the fear is worth it. That love is always worth it." "That's all I ever wanted you to learn," Maggie said, standing on her toes to kiss him. "That life is for living, not just surviving. That love and laughter are what make everything else worthwhile." "You taught me well," Ethan said, returning her kiss. "You continue to teach me every single day." They danced until the stars came out, surrounded by the family and community they had built together. Later, after everyone had gone home and the children were asleep, they sat on their porch as they had 1,000 times before. Another 25 years? Ethan asked, echoing Maggie's question from their 10th anniversary. If we're lucky, Maggie said. And even that won't be enough. I'll love you beyond this lifetime, Ethan Pierce. And I'll love you beyond forever, Ethan replied. You filled my life with laughter, Maggie. You filled it with love and joy and meaning. You made me whole. We made each other whole, Maggie said, as she always did. That's what true partnership is. They sat together under the stars, hands linked, hearts joined. Two people who had started as strangers with incompatible expectations and had become something so much more. They had built a life together, filled with laughter and love, with challenges overcome and joys celebrated. They had raised children who knew they were loved, who had learned from their parents' example what it meant to be partners in the truest sense. The Laughing Horse Ranch stood as a testament to what they had built. Not just the physical structures and the successful business, but the intangible things. The warmth that greeted anyone who visited, the laughter that echoed across the property, the love that infused every corner. Ethan Pierce had expected a quiet wife, someone who would fit into his life without disturbing his peace. Instead, the woman who arrived had turned his life upside down in the best possible way. Maggie Owens Pierce had brought laughter and light, had demanded that he open himself to life and love, had refused to accept anything less than his whole heart. And in doing so, she had given him everything he never knew he needed. She had given him a home, a family, a purpose beyond mere survival. She had given him laughter when he had forgotten how to smile, love when he had thought himself incapable of it, joy when he had settled for mere contentment. As they sat together on the porch of the ranch they had built together, Ethan thought about the advertisement he had placed all those years ago. It had been precise, practical, designed to attract exactly the kind of woman he thought he wanted. How grateful he was that the universe had ignored his specifications and sent him Maggie instead. "I love you," he said into the peaceful night, "more than words can express." "I know," Maggie said, squeezing his hand. "You show me every day in 1,000 small ways, and I love you just as much." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had learned that sometimes the best things in life are the ones we never knew to ask for. The woman who had arrived with a birdcage and laughter had filled Ethan's life with more than he had ever imagined possible. She had filled it with love, with family, with purpose and joy. And as the stars wheeled overhead and the desert night settled around them, Ethan Pierce knew that he was, without question, the luckiest man alive. Not because his life had been easy or without challenges, but because he had been brave enough, with Maggie's help, to open himself to love. And that love had transformed everything. The Laughing Horse Ranch would continue for generations, a legacy not just of business success, but of the love that had built it. And though years would pass and seasons would change, the laughter that had given the ranch its name would echo through it always. A reminder of the woman who had brought joy to a man who had forgotten how to smile, and the life they had built together. Their story was one of unexpected love, of two people who should never have worked together on paper but who fit together perfectly in reality. It was a story of growth and change, of learning to be vulnerable, of choosing joy even in the face of fear. It was a story of partnership in its truest form, two people building something together that was greater than the sum of its parts. And it was a story with a happy ending, not because everything was perfect, but because they had learned that happiness isn't about perfection. It's about finding someone who sees all your flaws and loves you anyway. It's about building a life together based on respect and affection, and the ability to laugh, especially at yourself. It's about being brave enough to open your heart, even when that means risking pain, because the alternative is a life half-lived. Ethan Pierce had expected a quiet wife. The woman who arrived filled his life with laughter, and in doing so, she had given him everything that truly mattered: love, family, joy, and a home that was more than just a place. It was the physical manifestation of everything they had built together. As they grew old together, surrounded by children and grandchildren, that home would remain a beacon of warmth and welcome, proof that sometimes the best things in life are the ones that take us completely by surprise.